set up the introduction for the presenters. So the context for this panel started in multiple places. So from the community data program, we were experimenting with web scraping, working with Wyatt, looking at particularly some housing issues and housing affordability, and trying to fill in a big gap in the data world. CMHC and Statistics Canada go a long way with their survey work, administrative data and survey data, but there is a gap. So looking at web scraping for things like Kijiji or Airbnb. So that was our starting point. Along the way, we came across a collaboration between Georgian College and Simcoe County doing something quite similar. And all roads then led back to Statistics Canada to ask, well, what is that agency doing with respect to web scraping? And in fact, they've certainly put a lot of thought to it and are taking some action. So we're going to hear from all three of those perspectives this morning. And the question for us around the table and as a program is this worth pursuing further? And if it is, how? Recognizing there are definitely some roadblocks to doing that. So that is the context. So I'll hand over to our three speakers. Maybe I gave a very high level introduction, your organizational affiliation. Maybe I'll just have each of you introduce yourselves as you speak.
Yeah, first we have a StatsCan team, so we'll just give the call to you, Shireen.
All right. Hi, everyone. This my turn, right, Saida? I don't see my name. I see.
Yes, Shireen. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I will share my screen. Hi, everyone. My name is Shireen Roshanafshar, and I'm a manager within the Data Science Division at Statistics Canada. My team specializes in text analytics. So we do a lot of projects related to natural language processing, natural language generation, using a lot of unstructured data. And it's really trying to modernize and use different sources of alternate data as opposed to the traditional surveys that we've been collecting at StatsCan really for over 100 years now. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the web scraping work that we have been doing at StatsCan, and a lot of considerations and ethical guidelines and privacy considerations that we also have to abide by at StatsCan when we are conducting a web scraping project. Right, so with that, I will, oh, there we go. You see the next slide? Working well? All right, perfect. So of course, websites contain large amounts of invaluable data, and we have a lot of unstructured data now everywhere on the internet. And we would like to try to make use of them and to try to leverage all this data that is on the internet when we can. And we can obviously do this work by using web scraping techniques. So instead of really copy pasting information manually from websites online, we can automate and extract the data using these web scraping techniques. And then the web scrape data can be, of course, cleaned, organized, and saved locally and used in different types of analysis that we could do. There are many different types of web scraping data. So it requires really a lot of tailoring that I believe the next presenters are going to get into some of the technical aspects of things. But it requires a lot of tailoring, and it's not always a very simple task because the websites and the information shared on them come in many different formats, such as tabular data, such as data in infographics and pictures, or charts and diagrams. So I'm going to talk about a couple StatsCan use cases that we have used web scraping for. The ones that I'm presenting today are both regarding the COVID-19 pandemic cases. So this first one was one when we were web scraping 24/7 every 30 minutes. This is at the very beginning of the pandemic, and we were scraping the 13 provincial and territorial health ministries' websites. And we also had access to some data that was coming to us from University of Toronto at the region level using web scrape data. So this was really to use another method, another source of data for web scraping, and then be able to confront the other data that we were receiving from another data source. And we were providing these daily reports to Public Health Agency of Canada on a daily basis at the very beginning of COVID pandemic. And the next one was really a longer term. It wasn't as frequent as the first one was. The first one was we were scraping every 30 minutes. This was done on a daily basis. And we were using health regions websites. So a lot of different regions and different municipalities that were reporting on COVID cases, number of deaths, outbreak information, and so on. And the client for this one was the health division within Statistics Canada. So we were doing this work for them, and they were working with FAC and CIHI on this project. So this was really daily information to provide important critical data to help our colleagues in the health division respond to COVID-19 pandemic and understand it, really understand the trend over a longer time period. So just very briefly on the different steps that was involved in this project was to download the raw web pages from the provinces and territories health regions websites, and then extract the information in standardized formats such as tables from there, store them in secure databases within StatsCan's infrastructure. And then we would provide this data to our analysts within health division at StatsCan to be able to do their analysis and reporting. So of course, scraping from official sources, Health Stats can collect the latest data that is available to respond to current events, where existing surveys are really lagging, or it takes usually a longer time to collect survey data, right? So usually when we are collecting survey data, it's the survey design, the frame, the sampling, and so on. So it's a much lengthier process. And as I mentioned, we are trying to really at StatsCan use these different alternate sources of data where we can. So as I briefly mentioned, there are a lot of guidelines and considerations that we have to abide by when we are using web scraping techniques. And we have to do this work in accordance with the necessity and proportionality framework at Statistics Canada, which I will briefly get into. And it's only non-personal data that we are able to scrape from the internet. And also we have the Data Ethics Committee Secretariat and the Chief Privacy Officer and the subject matter area Assistant Chief Statistician. So they're the senior managers that we have to report to about which websites we're scraping, what variables we're scraping, what kind of data we're scraping. And this needs to really be approved before we start any kind of scraping activities. And for us, the technical team, the developers, we have to follow the web scraping best practices that are really set out for us, which I will briefly get into. I briefly mentioned the necessity and proportionality framework. This is basically saying that, well, at StatsCan, we've been collecting data for over 100 years, and there is a necessity to measure our society, economy, and the environment at StatsCan. So we have to provide data regarding the society, economy, and the environment. But then we also, when we are planning these data collection activities, we really have to consider ethical considerations and privacy and fairness and transparency. So we have to weigh in the benefits, of course, what it brings, how we can better report on society, economy, and the environment, and how we are dealing with privacy, fairness, and transparency in these data collections. So a little bit more on our guidelines on web scraping. We want to provide reliable and timely data to Canadians, but we have to respect some of the best practices. So what we will do at Statistics Canada, we will have to abide by transparency and ethical considerations, which means that we have to be transparent, consistent, and in an ethical manner, be scraping websites. We have to be notifying all the websites and the companies that we are scraping from, and also publish the results of web scraping on our website. And we have to do all this work using authorized computer equipment at Statistics Canada. We have to use the data appropriately and responsibly, collect only the data that is available to the public, and also minimize the burden to these websites, and do our scraping when we are off-peak hours, so that it's not really a burden on the websites, and then also use APIs when possible, as opposed to scraping the information through the website. And as I mentioned, the necessity and proportionality framework that we always have to abide by, and we will not be scraping any personal information, and we will not be reselling any of the information, and also the information will not be used to, we will scrape any information that will not be used to produce statistical outputs. So that's really all I had today for you guys as an overview. Thank you.
So we did have a couple of questions. This might, but maybe we'll hold off on answering them until we're finished with the other two presentations. So is Irina, you're up next. And I should mention that Irina is she's representing Georgian College. Not only has she worked for Simcoe County in the past, but at the time she has served as Community Data Consortium lead for Simcoe County. So she's quite familiar with the program, as well as what Georgian College is doing on this web scraping initiative. So I'll hand it over to you, Irina.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks everyone. I can't see all of you in the room, but really happy to be back at another CDP conference. As Michelle said, I'm certainly not a stranger to this group and to the work, and really happy for any opportunity I can come back and be part of the conversations. So I'm really excited to be here for that. Yeah, the intersection of kind of my work background. In addition to when I was at the county, in addition to being part of the community data portfolio, I also oversaw part of the homelessness side of things as well. So really well versed around the need for affordable housing, and from the program side, what that looks like as well. So I'm going to start screen sharing here. Okay, let me just readjust my. Okay, is everyone looking at my PDF there with the, okay, great, thank you. I'm just gonna juggle here a little bit. Great, thank you. For any county staff on the line, yes, that is a corporately approved logo that's on the page. Just wanted to identify the partnership though that we have with the County of Simcoe. Certainly has been a huge component of moving this project forward. So I am going to take just like 2 seconds to talk a little bit about Georgian and the social innovation side of things, just kind of to explain how we came to be part of this work, specifically supporting a community initiative. So Georgian is an Ashoka Changemaker campus, and we are the first and only college in Canada that has this designation. So it is an international designation, and it really just identifies the commitment that Georgian has as an institution to support change making and social innovation opportunities within curriculum and within programs, and of course supporting community around those efforts as well. Another framework to mention that Georgian has committed to as an institution, I think this group will have some interest in this as well, is the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And what we've done is we've aligned all of our community impact labs, which I'll speak to that in a second. We've aligned each of our community impact labs specifically to one of the SDGs. And in this case, the affordable housing one aligns to 11 SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities. So that's another framework that we've certainly aligned to both as an institution and in our project work. So why the heck is Georgian College here to support this this work? So really around the social innovation team, as I said, our community impact labs, what we do is we align with a complex social issue that's happening in the community. We identify a key stakeholder. In this case, it was the County of Simcoe was our key partner. And then the next step is to identify who are the rest of the stakeholders, the rest of the actors, ecosystem actors around this space. And we come together around that lab or that complex issue happening. And we really work together to identify a solution. So as you can see in the middle, the diverse actors, recognizing that experience comes from multiple places within the community. So the Georgian team really acts as facilitators around bringing people together, providing the space, whether it's physical or virtual, to have those conversations and then move that work forward collectively using a very, very participatory approach. We also have physical spaces across right now 3 of our campuses and looking to build that opportunity up for more physical space as well. And again, it just goes to supporting the conversations. For those of you that are in the room physically, you can absolutely right now attest to the energy that comes with being with like-minded people talking about whatever the topic of the day is, the project is. It really speaks to helping support that working together and moving project forward. So we've recognized that and then have a lot of physical space to support that work as well. I'm going to skip over the slide just in the interest of time. It just speaks to how we recognize the strengths that community have and then the strengths that the Georgian team brings to all of the projects that we support. So specifically around the housing, the Affordable Housing Lab, this is a picture from one of our community events. I've got a couple more in here as well. So really the opportunity was to explore expanding access to rental market data. This was a really programmatic question to start with. It really was to identify the challenges that the county staff were having around getting access to real-time quality local data about rental units to support building programs and policies specifically around rent subsidies. So our approach for all of the labs, what we do, it's a cyclical approach. So we have three cycles that we go through. The first cycle is explore and understand the issue from the perspective of diverse actor groups. What problem are we solving? So as I said, the initial problem was better access to rental data, to local rental data. But what we did is we went a little bit deeper, and I'll speak to how we unpack that a little bit more with our partners. Once we have an understanding, a really deep understanding of what that problem space is, we experiment. We identify what are some potential solutions. And then we build a prototype and we test that prototype and we evaluate if we hit the mark with that. And then cycle 3, where you can see this little "you are here" symbol, that's where we are right now with this lab, and we're in the deploy stage. So identifying who are the stewards who are going to continue on this work, and where is this prototype going to land within community. One of the things that we identify as the Georgian team, we're not the owners of the prototype or the thing that is built at the end of this process. We're the guides along the way, but really the intent is for this project, this prototype, to land somewhere in community and be sustained as a model moving forward. So as I said, the identified challenge was, let's build a scraper. Let's start getting better access to rental data, leveraging technology to identify where we can get better sources of rental market data in a real-time way. So the challenge was that there was that lack of reliable, detailed, and timely local data. The current methods were inefficient, they were laborious, and they did not result in that real-time data. So the county staff really has a labor-intensive way of pulling this data locally. It's really a manual process with their research analysts going to sites that have market rent units listed and literally, manually scraping, in a sense, into an Excel database so that they can have this great data set of local market rent data. But it's not efficient, and certainly it's not real time. So that was the proposed solution, was to build the scraper with the intent to have that improved access to quality data about the local rental market, to have improved access to specific rental unit listings. So not just as an aggregate, but also understanding where are those units, and having the information, the detailed information about the units. Another objective of our collaboration of working together was to bring the community into this conversation, recognizing that the college and the county aren't the only ones that hold good answers, good possible solutions to this, but it really is a community-led effort around learning more and identifying potential solutions. And then the student learning benefits. We're a post-secondary institution. We work with students in a number of different ways. So having an opportunity to support student learning outcomes in this was an identified outcome as well. So here's a couple pictures of the methodologies that we use. Some of you might remember Victoria. She's the research analyst from the county as well that has done a lot of support with the community data program. She was one of certainly our champions with this. She was a key research analyst who supported the average market rent report that the county did a number of years. And she was a pivotal source of support and information in providing in this lab specifically as well. So we did a number of different exercises. We did some journey mapping. We did some 3 horizons exercises. We essentially, they're social innovation tools and frameworks that bring people together to have conversations and learn more about the complex solutions that we're all working towards. We also, a colleague of mine on our team is a futurist, so she was able to pull in some strategic foresight through a scan club that we did around affordable housing, and we had some really good learnings about that as well. So as you can see, we went a lot deeper than building just the scraper to get some really important information around how this affects affordable housing as a whole. So we identified technology as just one part of the solution. It's about digital equity, having open access to quality data, and having flexible data sharing policies. It's about building relationships and community and understanding the power dynamics that are at play, not just between landlords and tenants, but between access to the information as well. This, policy legislation change is slow and based on outdated data. So that's one of the key reasons that we need access to that quality data in a timely way. And then some deeper conversations around affordable housing in general. So the opportunity for innovative housing options and creative funding opportunities. So the prototype. This is what we did. We worked with our Georgian College students, or the computer studies class. It was a 2-year program, and this was the wrap up, their capstone project. So 3 student teams took on building a prototype, and we had some really good examples. I pulled in screenshots of 2 of them. So they built scrapers. And what was great is that the scraper technology wasn't a direct part of the students' curriculum in the course. They were able to take the learnings that they had over the 2-year period of their course, and obviously supplement it a little through self-learning, and then they went ahead and built the scraper. So what was great is that we gave each of the teams the same brief, but then the prototype they built, they were so creative and so different in their approach. I mean, they had the same basic functionality of going out and scraping the data and bringing it in, but they just looked different, and how they approached that was really cool. So that's what I love to see, is that it seems like there's, an easy solution to this in terms of build a tool that does ABC, but the creative opportunity for students to bring in the learnings was just awesome to see. So the challenges that they ran into, I know this won't be a surprise to the group. They've been talked a little bit about already. Data sharing policies. The students hit this hard. I think the first week they tried to start their project, we gave them a list of the data sources that the research analyst team at the County of Simcoe was using, and that was their starting point. And they created a spreadsheet and said, these are the sources that allowed us to scrape the data. These are the sources that didn't allow us to scrape the data. So I can't remember how many were on the list. I would say upwards of 20. And it was less than half that they were technically allowed to scrape the data from. So that's what you're seeing here, is data scraped from the ones they were allowed to. And even within there was some tech issues that I know Wyatt will speak to, or will be able to speak to a lot better than I will. So definitely around the access to that data. Some of the challenges we had as well is, who is the front end user? Initially, we thought the front end user would be analysts and program and policy staff, which is what the current end user is for the AMR data that the county puts together. But there was conversations, well, if we're talking about access to equitable data, shouldn't the front end user be the people looking for the rental units. So we had some conversation around this in the scope of equitable access to data as well. So it was certainly a challenge that we didn't really foresee until we started having those deeper conversations around access to the data. And then, as I mentioned already, stewardship of the app. Where is this going to land? Initially, it was, looking as a county project, but as we expanded our group of actors involved in the conversation, identified that this isn't a need just in the Simcoe area, but certainly across Ontario, across Canada, especially when you look at some of the, national housing strategy and even different provinces around our programs and funding opportunities. So definitely an opportunity to expand the conversation around stewardship. One of the ones I don't have listed up, but Sharon, when you were presenting, you talked about scraping and pulling in non-personal data only, and it reminded me that was some of the conversation and challenge we ran into as well, because when you're scraping an address location, is that personal information, right? So that once we get into the nuance of that level of detail around looking at the data variables specifically, there were some challenges that we ran into as a group as well. So our next steps, where are we at now? We are working with our stewardship committee on ideas of where to land these prototypes. The stewardship committee has been given access to those 3 prototypes that I talked about that the student teams were able to build. So just understanding what is the functionality behind those specific prototypes. And then a spin-off prototype that came out of this is when we started talking about getting, the non-access to those scraper sources of data. Well, we talked about, what about crowdsourcing the data? So going right to the source. And what we're piloting right now with Georgian College is crowdsourcing opportunities, so that we're going directly to the student body, asking them for their data, so that we're not looking at the need to work with existing data policies. It's volunteer data. So working with a form, it's literally a Microsoft Office form that collects the same data variables, and we've expanded it a little bit more with the student approach. So anyway, I won't speak to that one. I just wanted to identify the opportunity that the lab, working through the lab process, gave us around the deeper discussion of the web scraping possibility, and then those spin-offs that came through that as well. And then I know you'll have access to these slides. There's just a few links there for more information specifically about our labs. And we have posted some information about the Affordable Housing Lab at our Linktree site. And then I also put the Simcoe County site as well, which has the current average market rent reports. And that's it for me. I think we're holding questions to the very end.
Yeah, that was the plan. Thanks, Irina. And Wyatt will be sharing more technical aspects of his experience of actually going forward with looking at some housing related data. This was just for Ontario, but the same principles would apply to the rest of Canada. So I'll hand it over to you, Wyatt. And I should say that Wyatt is are you currently based in the US? Or are you back in Guelph?
No, I'm currently still in Kentucky.
Yeah, so we met Wyatt. He'd just come out with a physics degree and was exploring the world of coding, and is now back at school doing a master's degree in computer science.
It's in analytics.
And it's just one of those highly skilled, appropriately wired brained person who can play very effectively. So I just want to hand it over to you, Wyatt, and let's hear what your experience.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michelle. So yeah, like Michelle was saying, I'm currently a student at the Georgia Institute of Technology, and I'm earning my master's in analytics. So I previously worked with Creative Neighborhoods and the Community Data Program. So my primary goal with this presentation is just to make you more familiar with the web scraping process, so that you can recognize when it's a viable option to bringing value into your workflow, and also to sort of empower you to, try to do these things yourself if you see the need. Because, before I met Michelle, I had never done any web scraping. I did have some background in Python programming, but it's really not as difficult as it will appear to be. And once you get your hands into it, I think that pretty much anybody can learn to do it if they'd like. So I'll start by answering what is web scraping, what my favorite language for web scraping is, what are the different types of web scraping, and what are the general steps in the web scraping process. Next, I'll quickly go through an example of web scraping from Kijiji, followed by a discussion of how I've used web scraping and the challenges that I've faced. And I'll end by going over some additional resources that people can explore if they would like to try setting up their own web scraping applications. So what is web scraping? Well, it's simply the act of taking data from a web page and putting it into a more structured format. So if you've ever copied and pasted from a website before, then you've already web scraped. But there's so much data on the web these days that copying and pasting it all would take an eternity. And that's where programming and automation come in. On the left, we can see an Airbnb listing. And on the right, we can see the data contained in the ad listing in a more structured way. This is just one ad in Mississauga out of over 1,000 ads, and trying to manually copy them all down into a spreadsheet would be nearly impossible. But with programming, it can be made trivial. Automating the web scraping process not only increases the speed, but it also increases the accuracy because it eliminates the possibility for human error when copying the data. By being able to collect large amounts of data, we can learn and gain new insights into whatever we are trying to determine. For example, I have no idea if $52 a night is a good deal, but if I could collect every listing available to calculate the average cost per night, then I'd be able to determine whether it was a good deal. So my favorite programming language for web scraping is Python. It's a general purpose programming language that was designed around being human readable, and it's currently the fastest growing programming language in the world. On the right, there are two coding examples. One is from Python and one is from another language called C++. Both codes perform the same task, but the Python code is much more concise and understandable. We'll look at some more Python code in the Kijiji example, but first we'll go over the different types of web scraping. So there are two main ways to scrape using Python. There's a headless and a simulated approach. The headless approach doesn't use a web browser, and the website information can be accessed directly by the program, whereas the simulated approach is simulating someone using a web browser and therefore requires one. The headless approach is faster because the website does not need to render into a fancy human readable form, and easier to implement because we don't need to simulate user actions such as button clicks or typing, which we might need in a simulated approach. The one downside of the headless approach is that it doesn't work in some cases. For example, some websites use an endless scroll to show their data, and the only way to access all the data is to manually scroll on the web page. But for most cases, the headless approach will be the best, and it is what I'll be covering in more detail. So what are the steps of web scraping? The first step is to find the website URL containing the data that you want. This is like finding out your friend's address. The second step is to send a request to the website, just like you send a piece of mail to your friend's address, and ask them to write back to you. The third step is to parse the response into hypertext markup language. So the response will be a non-human readable form, whereas the HTML has a semantic structure that can be read. This is like if your friend wrote back to you in a language you didn't understand, so you used a translator to decipher the message. Fourth is to determine where the data you want is located within the HTML. A lot of the web page will be data you don't need to collect. This is like your friend wrote you a long response that included a grocery list, but you're only interested in storing the grocery list portion for your shopping trip the next day. Fifth is to collect the data and store it, like copying your friend's grocery list into your easy-to-carry notebook. And lastly, iterate through additional website URLs if required. So this could be like multiple pages of search results. Imagine that your friend is only able to send you one day of grocery items at a time, but you want to shop for the whole week. So you have to send them 7 different requests, one for each day of the week. And now we'll look at some real life examples in Kijiji. So in this example, I'm collecting the title of ad listings for antique radios. At the top, we have the first listing from Kijiji. On the left, we have our code. And on the right, we have a demonstration of how the HTML of the web page could look. First, I got the URL by searching for antique radios on Kijiji in my web browser and copying it from the address bar. Then I request the web page programmatically and translate the response into a readable format called HTML. We can then search the HTML to find where our data is stored, or we can access it in our browser by right-clicking the data we want to collect and clicking Inspect. And we tell the program to collect all the data that matches those locations. Finally, once we have collected all our data, we can store it into a text file for later use. This is a simple example, but pretty much anything that you can see on your web browser can be collected in this way. For example, we could have also collected the radio prices if we wanted and stored the title and price into a spreadsheet. So here's our final text file containing the titles. We only collected the first page of results, but we could iterate through each page if we wanted and create a massive list very quickly. Here is a more advanced example. This webpage shows 2-bedroom apartment listings in Guelph, and there are 15 search results matching these criteria. If we click into the first ad, we can see that there's a lot of information available about the rental. We can see all sorts of things like the price and size. Anything that we can see here can be collected. Now here's the data for our 15 listed, collected and put into a spreadsheet. Once the code was written in Python, this only took seconds to collect, and I know that it's 100% accurate. If we wanted, we could also reuse this code to collect rental listings for other filter parameters because they will have a similar web page structure. We can now use this data for analysis and determine things like the average price or size of the apartments and what percentage of each utility is included in the price. Some of the other ways that I've used web scraping include snapshotting the Ontario housing and rental market, where I was able to collect every house listing from realtor.ca, every rental listing on Kijiji, and every Airbnb listing for Ontario. Here's one of the visualizations that I was able to create from that data, where we can easily view the most and least expensive areas of Ontario. I've also used web scraping to set up ad listing alerts, where I will have a program to scrape the newest listings for a product I'm interested in on an interval and email me when the item I'm interested in becomes available or has a price change. I also use web scraping often to collect data that isn't freely available in a pre-aggregated format. Recently, I was working on a project where I was predicting the outcome of baseball games, and I wanted to use the player salaries as a factor. But the only freely available data was listed out on a separate web page for each team and year, and the table on the web page couldn't just be copy and pasted due to the formatting. So I set up a quick web scraping script to easily collect the data. And finally, I've used web scraping to crawl through websites where the program will scrape all the links on a web page, then follow those links and scrape all the links on those pages until it has collected every link. This is great for discovering resources on websites that you didn't know were available, or for creating your own search engine. So some of the challenges you might face when web scraping include the data identifiers changing in the HTML. So earlier we talked about how the structure of the web page, and you need to tell the program where to look for the data. The location of the data or the identifier for the data can change when the website gets updated, and you'll also need to update the program as well with the new location. There is also the possibility that a website might block your IP from accessing the website because you're trying to access the web page a lot more often than a normal user would. Usually the website doesn't care that you are scraping, and it's an automated response because they're worried about bad people flooding their website with traffic to try to crash it. So they automatically block your IP. But this can be avoided by putting a delay into your program, and even if you get blocked, it usually only lasts a day or two. I like to add a couple second delay into my web scraping programs, and it doesn't really matter if it takes a little bit longer because you can continue to work on other things while the program collects data in the background. But sometimes you can't access all the data on a web page because of the way that it's structured. For example, Kijiji will only show the first 100 pages or 4,000 listings of search results when the actual number could be in the millions. One of the ways to get around this is to use the website's built-in filters and filter down until you reach the limit, then modify the filters until you're able to collect everything. And the last big problem that I've run into is CAPTCHAs. These are tests to determine if it's a computer accessing the website or if it's a person accessing the website. And this is where simulating the web browser comes into play, because if you're simulating a web browser, then you can take over manual control to solve the CAPTCHAs, then let the program continue scraping. On the right, we have 4 myths about web scraping provided by Apify, a business that provides web scraping as a service. The first myth is that web scraping is illegal. This isn't true. There are currently no laws banning web scraping on the internet. The second is that scrapers operate in a gray area. This also isn't true. There are a lot of companies that sell web scraping services, and they follow the same rules as regular businesses. The third is that web scraping is hacking, but in reality, even the headless browser is making requests the same way that a normal user in a browser like Chrome would be making, and they're just able to do it in a faster and different way. And the fourth is that web scrapers are stealing data, but web scrapers are actually only able to collect data that's already publicly available. It's like if you went into a store and wrote down the name and price of a product onto a notepad. That wouldn't be considered stealing data. But there is a lot more nuance to this topic than these answers can provide, and I encourage anyone who's interested to read the complete article on Apify. So lastly, I'd like to leave you with some additional resources you can explore if you're interested. The first is a software package called Anaconda. It's the world's most popular data science platform. It's free and it includes Jupyter Notebooks, which is a great place to learn web scraping, and try out coding. Jupyter Notebooks is actually what I use for pretty much all of my web scraping projects. The next is a book called Automate the Boring Stuff with Python, which is also available free online. It has a chapter dedicated to web scraping, but also has a lot of other automation techniques and is aimed towards total beginners. There's also ChatGPT, a freely available artificial intelligence tool that can help you write your code and answer coding questions. But for questions it can't answer, there is Stack Overflow, which is a huge community for programming where pretty much any question you can think of has already been asked and answered. Next is GitHub, a place where programmers will upload some of their programs publicly, and you can search to see if anyone has already created a program for your need. Usually you'll need to modify the code for your use case, but it can be a great starting place. And finally, there are a lot of web scraping as a service businesses online, which for a fee will web scrape data for you if you aren't interested in learning to code. Thanks everyone for listening, and I hope that you were able to learn more about web scraping today. And thank you to the Community Data Program for the opportunity to present.
Thanks a lot, Wyatt. You almost had me convinced that even I could do this. You do make it feel like it's easier, but I do think you have skills that are above average.
I appreciate that. I think it's really just the grit, right? Anybody who's willing to learn, I think that you can, and now is a great time to be doing it.
And I love your 4 myths. I hope we can subscribe to those as myths as well, or others will.
Yeah, I hope they continue to be myths.
You sure that those myths weren't AI generated by? Can you come up with 4 myths and make us feel better about doing what we're doing?
Well, they were generated by a business doing it for profit, so.
If I have some self-interest in that.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
we have about 15 minutes left, and we thought we'd use this time to answer questions. A couple of questions asked on the chat were answered, but Saida, maybe if you just want to go through and ask the speakers about some of the questions that may not have been answered, and if any of you had some questions, we could end with that.
So first question. Yeah, the first question was, I think, for Shireen about her presentation, asking, can you please define official sources? If Sandra Lee wants to provide more information, you can just turn on your mic and.
There was a particular slide.
Yeah, it was related to a particular slide when you were talking about the places where you scrape data from. You said that you only you use official sources. I'm not sure if you referenced it down below, that you are using primarily government websites. But anyway, I was just wondering what kinds of websites you consider official.
Thanks, Sandra. Yes, that would be mostly provincial or municipal or federal government websites that we have been mostly scraping. It is possible to scrape other websites, but more limitations and more permissions and consultations with our legal team are required. But yes, official, we mean municipal, provincial, federal.
Thank you.
The next question, I think,
Well, I guess it's related to the earlier question, which is what experience has there been with private sources, like Kijiji, for example?
I think that's a question for me. Not so much, really, especially for producing official statistics. Again, because of a lot of limitations that we have, and anything that has, personal information or even accounts that is against our policies. So we are not able to do that. I can't speak to all of StatsCan, but pretty much my team are the experts. So I would assume that there's not much more that has been done using private websites.
Thanks.
So we have another question. I believe that Shireen answered it in the chat box about the algorithm and codes, scraping algorithm and codes that are developed in-house, like at StatsCan, or and then it seems that it's all in-house. And Shireen says we have very technical teams of data scientists. The next question is that Yes, do you
Oh,
want?
sorry. And basically what Wyatt presented, all the tools are the tools that our data scientists are using as well. Usually 90% of our work is done using Python programming. So that's what we use, and web scraping is probably one of the easiest tasks as well for the data scientists. So anyone can pick it up really.
The next question is that I've heard that web scraping from website like Airbnb are against their terms of use and open us to significant liabilities. Do you have a comment on this?
Yeah, so it's definitely good to try to request, any permission that you can. I've talked to a lot of people who have reached out to Airbnb and similar websites like Kijiji, and usually they're just left with no response. And I think as long as you're doing it from an educational basis and you're not, trying to profit off of their information or trying to repost it, I think they'll probably be fine. I don't think there'll be too much like repercussions from that sort of thing. I only really use it for educational purposes. And as long as, like I said, you're putting delays into your programs, then they don't really mind the extra traffic. But yeah, definitely try to reach out to them and get permission if you can. And if you're worried about things, don't do it. Can you expand on requesting permission to scrape website? Is this through a code-generated question, or do you actually contact someone at the organization? So pretty much on every website, they'll have their terms of use that you can read through to determine whether or not it's against their terms of use. And if you notice that it is against their terms of use, then yeah, I would go through their customer service or whatever contact email that they provide and try to reach out to them. I haven't seen any code-generated questions like where you can just automatically try to request it. Maybe that'll be something they have in the future. Python looks like the next step for me. I've been using a simulated workflow, recording Excel macros with copy pasting and complicated formulas. Our organization is unwilling to accept the security concerns and allowing me to install a programming language on a computer behind the firewall. Are there any online tools that would allow programming without the increased security concerns? I don't know too much about security concerns. I don't know if someone else would want to talk onto that. To be able to do these things, you're gonna have to use a web browser and access, the internet. Or maybe the simulated if you have access to just Chrome. I don't know if Sharon wants to talk on that.
And maybe very briefly, of course, that's Can2. We have a lot of cybersecurity guidelines and limitations that are set in place. Python and R were not always allowed for sure for us to use, but finally a few years ago, I don't know, maybe about definitely before COVID, but about maybe 7-8 years ago, we were finally allowed to use open source tools and technologies, which is really the future. And we were able to kind of get them approved by cybersecurity. And I think Python should certainly be something that the organizations allow their employees to use. So I would say just follow up. But also there are tools like Google Colab, for example, that you can use within browsers. So if you're not allowed to really install programs, right, Wyatt? I see him nodding. So you could use other tools online as well.
Just the next question asking, can Shirin comment on the 4 methods shared by Wyatt?
If you don't mind, Wyatt, if you
Yeah.
could put the screen again, please.
Well, I'll just quickly go through them. So the first myth is that web scraping is illegal.
Oh, it's definitely not illegal, but we have to obtain permission. And we certainly at Statistics Canada, unless we do obtain permission, we absolutely don't do it. But
Yeah,
it's certainly not illegal.
And the second is that scrapers operate in a gray area. So I don't think that really holds for Statistics Canada. I think that's more me, right?
Yeah, no, a lot of transparency, as I mentioned, within our policies and guidelines on web scraping that we have to exactly say what we're web scraping, what variables we're web scraping, at what level of information, if it's aggregate, if it's individual level, and so on. So certainly not a gray area.
The third is that web scraping is hacking.
Is hacking? No, absolutely not. It's not hacking. If you're running a scraper, then that, you know, is abusing the website, and it's running it every minute, and it's causing issues for the website, for the company. Of course, it could, I wouldn't still call it hacking, but it could cause issues. But if it's done responsibly, like a human would, and go extract information, it's certainly, there's nothing wrong with it.
And the last is that web scrapers are stealing data.
Absolutely not. It's data online for public to use, like anyone else is able to, you know, go and access the data and use them for their analysis, for data collection, and so on. So certainly not stealing.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have a question from one person here.
Sure. My question is, does web scraping capability gets limited based on how the website is laid out? For example, if it's a list versus a dashboard, like can web scraping do the same thing?
Maybe I can take a first stab at it and then pass it on to the other. Yes, so if it's tabular data, it's beautiful. You know, if it's a picture, for example, with an infographics, or if it's geospatial data using, you know, ArcGIS APIs and so on. So it could get more complicated. But usually the data scientists, the scrapers, whoever is setting up the programs, Wyatt can comment on it more, can really tailor it to each website. So usually it's not the case that you set up one scraper and give it 100 websites and it goes and extracts all the information. You have to really look at some of the websites and tailor it so that it extracts the right information. Wyatt, Irina, if you want to comment more.
Yeah, you definitely have to tailor them. It's sort of like when you're setting up your code, the first time that you do it, you sort of have to do everything manually. Like you have to find where the data is manually. And yeah, you could scrape things like pictures, but if your data, like let's say someone took like a screenshot of a spreadsheet or something, that you won't be able to do, right? Because that, like, you'll be able to download the picture, but you wouldn't be able to download the individual, you know, parts of the picture because they're just stored in that picture format. And then, like, you know, of course, that then extends to things like videos. If there's information in a video, you'd be able to download the whole video file, but you wouldn't be able to extract like the numbers from the video. So every website's gonna be a little bit different, but pretty much most things you can see, you'll be able to take if it's not, you know, in one of those formats. And sometimes, you know, the website will be set up very nice where you'll look into the HTML, like the structure of the website, and it'll say like, you know, title, price, all these different identifiers, and you'll be able to go, oh, great, like I know that this is where I need to look to grab that piece of data. Whereas other times a website will be set up with, you know, just code where it'll be like 5.4b6, and it'll be a lot more difficult to pinpoint those little areas. But yeah, pretty much anything that you can see, you can find a way to collect it.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a question asking, do any of the presenters have tips of securing permission?
From the data sources.
Yes. Okay. Any presenters wants to respond?
For us at StatsCan, really writing some nice emails and say for what purpose we are scraping this data and what value it brings to Canadians, and how this would benefit Canadians really and offsets any kind of risks that there may be.
And it probably helps that the letter is signed by a recognized government entity.
Usually that helps, the ones that like us.
Yes. Actually, for Wyatt, have you ever successfully heard back from any company or website?
No, I've never heard back from anyone. And like I said, I've reached out to a lot of people, like, because I'll go on GitHub to find similar people who have done similar work. And a lot of people will publish, like whole articles with their methods of how they've done this. And you talk to them and they say they tried to get permission and they just couldn't. Yeah, so it's definitely difficult. Like it's really hard because these are huge corporations. It's hard to get a hold of anyone really.
And I can just speak on behalf of our stewardship committee with our project. We did have a team member do the diligence of reaching out to all of the data sources, data providers, that are listed in the county's average market rent report, and did not hear back either. So Sharon, I love your tips though. The way, just being very transparent about what you're doing with the data, where it's going, how is it going to be used to support the ask. It's all about the transparency.
And I think previously we've also talked about how, like, if you did something like how I did, where I took the data from Kijiji, like if I were then to rehost that data, I would, link it. I would put the links to Kijiji so that they're still getting that web traffic that they would get otherwise if I hadn't done it.
So we have two more questions, and we'll take two, but we really are at the end of our session. So we'll just deal with these final two questions, and then we will have to close to allow people to hit the road or the air, as the case may be.
Yes. Okay. So the first question is that what happens when a government department scrapes data, but then has an obligation to post all their data sets to their open data portal? Would the business entity whose data was web scraped complain that it's being redistributed? What if they give permission, but then later revoke it? Has this happened in your experience?
That certainly hasn't happened in my experience when it has been revoked, because it's been also very clear about why we are scraping and why we are putting the data together, mostly in the COVID cases, and how it's going to benefit with preparation for the COVID pandemic, in my experience.
So the second question is that we have received legal advice that we open ourselves to legal liability web scraping personal information from Airbnb and Kijiji listings. Do you have a comment on this?
Yeah,
The keyword there is personal information.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I think if you're collecting personal information, then, or intellectual property, that definitely opens you up to legal liability. But there are also certain things that, are just facts, like the price of something, or, like how many bedrooms a house has. Or I think even just the location of a house, maybe not the specific address, especially if you're, sharing people's address with their name or something. But if it's anonymized, I think there's less of a legal liability, but I would definitely be listening to the lawyer, not me. So
I was going to add on to that as well, Wyatt, and I was going to start my comment with that. I am by no means a lawyer, so I'm not trying to trump any advice, any legal advice you've received. But my comment on this would be how you intend to, what you're going to be doing with that personal information. And if you're resharing it at the individual level, certainly that would be a higher risk situation than if you're taking it internally, not sharing it, but analyzing it and maybe publishing in an aggregate format. So you're not publishing any personally identifiable information. That might be a consideration when looking at that kind of legal potential. Again, not a lawyer.
I was just going to mention, I'll just do a quick Google. The Toronto Real Estate Board successfully got an injunction against Mongo House for scraping and reselling multiple listing for the Toronto area.
Right.
Yeah. I think I've seen the Mongo House one, and that's really more so of an issue of them, kind of taking their whole business, right? Because they were listing, they sort of created their own listing website and were profiting off their own listing website. So if you're like trying to compete with their business, then yeah, that will definitely raise their flags for sure.
And there's also the huge distinction between criminal and civil liability as well.
As we all know, courtesy Donald Trump. Right. Well, on that note, I want to thank all of our speakers for taking some time and shedding some very important light on a topic that is important to us, just because it is both very easy, but remains full of question marks. And that is a dangerous territory to be in. So I want to thank all of you and thank our guests and our members. And everyone is about to wrap up and head back to their respective homes. This brings almost to an end our day and a half of our annual meeting, but thank you again and look forward to hearing from you all over the next few weeks and months. Please let us know your thoughts, especially our members, about where you want us to go with web scraping. And if we should have another webinar on it, we're obviously happy to do that and keep probing.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And have a
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
bye.